Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another amazing episode of Transylvaniacs, the chronicling of two good friends trying to watch every single Dracula adaptation as they can without going clinically insane.
Each episode, we try to explore every film adaptation of Dracula, from Dracula A to Dracula Z. Colleen, how are you? It's been an age since we did this.
Been an actual age. For those of you who are, for some bizarre reason, starting at episode like 11 or 12 or whatever the fuck this is, Will and I took a little summer break so we could, I think the idea was that we could like do fun summer vacation stuff, but the reality for me at least is that I sweated my ass off in my apartment and then went to go see my parents. But this is our first time back in like probably over a month, maybe even two. I'm doing well though. How are you?
I am doing so well. I did get a little vacation time. I got to go spend a couple of days in Maine with former guest host of the show, Chris Melville.
Woohoo! That's lovely. What did you do in Maine?
Yeah. Spent some time down along the coast, did a little hiking, and like real fun New England hiking where it is just completely overcast and you can see absolutely nothing in front of you.
Yes, that's appropriately spooky. Before we started recording, you and I were just talking about how like we are at the part of the year now where it's actually cool in the evenings, which is just the best feeling on planet Earth. It really gets the spooky wheels turning.
Yeah, my birthday was about a week ago, and my usual protocol is the day after my birthday I start celebrating the Halloween season.
I think that's valid. I think a younger me would have been cranky about the Halloween things showing up in stores in August. But at this point, I'm just decided to accept that it's going to happen. And I might as well enjoy X months of spooky instead of like just the month of October. Know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. I am an aging creature, and I know what I like. And it is spooky things and sweater weather, and the sooner I can lean into that, the better off I am.
That's very valid of you, frankly. Are you 32 now? Was that your birthday?
I am now 32 whole years old.
Wow. Love that for you. Adam will be 32 in a couple of months. And then me and Chris and Nina will all be 31 because we lag behind you. We got to get Nina on this show, but I have to figure out what's the best episode for her. I'm inclined to say Bram Stoker's Dracula because it's such a Nina movie.
Yes, I know we had promised her Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School when we get into the sort of the freewheeling era of the show, but if we can get her on sooner, I'm all for it.
Right, yeah, no, Scooby-Doo is hers for sure, and even though Chris will fight her for it, like they can share if need be. But I was just thinking about Scooby-Doo the other day, actually. I need to like kind of watch some contemporary Scooby-Doo, like the animated versions, because I just kind of like haven't. I watched all the Hanna-Barbera stuff as a kid. And then obviously the live action movies, both of them within the last few years, I'm pretty sure. But I don't think I watched a lot of the contemporary animated. But I heard it's pretty good.
I just watched a Kiss Meets Dracula.
Holy fuck.
Straight-to-video movie from 2015 while I was in Maine. And it was a movie that was made exclusively for me and nobody else.
Oh my god, that's so good. So again, if you're new here for some bizarre reason, I'm a sometimes writer and always editor over at The Hard Times, which is a punk and music satire site. And anytime we have anything about Kiss, I send that shit to you immediately, even though it's pretty much the same joke over and over again, which is Kiss sucks. But I know that you love them.
You do not love Kiss from the time you're like 15 without hearing that Kiss sucks a couple hundred times in your life. You just let it wash over you.
Yep. It's part of the experience of being a true, only real Kiss fans know that everybody will tell you they suck.
Yes.
But today we've got kind of a fun treat. So our last, I think, full length episode that was not a mailbag episode, we talked about Renfield, which was a contemporary movie. And then I think our next episode probably will be The Last Voyage of the Demeter because that's just come out. But we are actually doing the 1979 Nosferatu the Vampire, directed by the one, the only Werner Herzog. And this was so interesting. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about our history with the film and with Herzog. So I had never seen this, had you?
I'd seen it once a couple years ago and was pretty transfixed by it.
That's valid. Most of my Herzog experience is his documentary work, like particularly Grizzly Man. And I think that I've seen at least clips of the documentary about Fitzcarraldo. But I love Werner Herzog, like, as a cultural icon and as a voice actor. I think he's just one of those guys who has a weird air about him that makes him kind of mesmerizing in like a David Lynch kind of way, where you're like, what the fuck is this man? What are you talking about, dude? But I love it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. He's one of those figures. I've seen Grizzly Man, I've seen Aguirre the Wrath of God, and I have seen this, and not a whole lot of his other filmography, but I am also kind of obsessed with Werner Herzog as a human. I have also seen the mini documentary Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe. Are you familiar
As have I.
with this?
I am familiar with
Okay,
Werner
yes,
Herzog
did they show this to us in our did they show this to us in our documentary class?
I feel like yes, but there's also a very distinct possibility that just like being who we are, you and I both watched this separately, independent of each other at different times. But I feel like they did show it to us in documentary class, but I also remember Addie seeing it at some point, so maybe she showed it to me. Did he also do a a movie called Garlic is as Good as 10 Mothers? I might be making that up.
I think so.
Like, that sounds right? Okay, hold up.
Are we looking this up?
Yeah, As Good as 10 Mothers. No, it's Les Blanc, but I don't know why I thought Werner Herzog did that. It just sounds like something. Oh, okay, here's why. Because in Burden of Dreams, which is the documentary about the making of Fitzcarraldo, Werner Herzog is wearing a Garlic is as Good as 10 Mothers shirt. And I remember watching part of that documentary with my wife, and she was like, that sounds like my kind of movie. Because
I mean, that is the
garlic.
hardest shirt.
Like, it's so hard. Anyway, but yeah, Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe is a classic. It's like 15 minutes long, and it's exactly what it sounds like. So go watch that on YouTube or some shit. Anyway, will you give us a little bit of background about the film, our cast and crew, and then I'll give us a little plot summary?
Absolutely. All right, so as we have discussed, Werner Herzog directed this movie, which came out in 1979. Herzog also wrote the screenplay for this. A cinematographer was Jörg Schmidt-Reitwein, with an original score by Florian Frick and Popol Vuh. Our cast for this one, we have got that lovable nutcase Klaus Kinski as Count Dracula. We have got Bruno Ganz as Jonathan Harker. We've got a little bit more of a shift up with a mix up with Lucy and Mina, swapping roles in this one, and we've got Isabel Adjani as Lucy Harker. Mina, who barely appears in this, is played by Marcek Roman. Walter Lettingast, who also barely appears in this movie, is Van Helsing. And then we have got, as our Renfield, Roland Topol.
Hell yes. The thing that's interesting about this film is that although it is technically an adaptation of Dracula, it is more so a remake of the earlier version of Nosferatu from the 20s. Specifically because Werner Herzog thinks that that was one of the finest pieces of German cinema ever produced. So this is an adaptation of an adaptation. And there are some big changes both from the original novel and from the original film. But most importantly here is we've got the good old Lucy-Mina swap. Mina, I think, is in perhaps one scene and maybe speaks twice. So I don't really even count her as a character. Lucy is the love interest of Jonathan, and is the secondary protagonist. Jonathan works for Renfield in this, before Renfield goes crazy and winds up in the asylum, which I believe is accurate to the 20s Nosferatu as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we've got kind of the main change is that there is only one trek. So in this, Jonathan goes to Transylvania. Dracula comes to, in this version, Germany, and that is where our main kind of final confrontation takes place. I would say the second major part of the changes from this version to the 1920s version is that there is a very, very substantial change to how the end works. In the 1920s Nosferatu, our Lucy basically goes to sacrifice herself in order to trick Dracula into drinking her blood due to some prophecy that's basically like, hey, if Dracula finds a woman who is pure or some shit, I don't fucking know, he will be then vulnerable to sunlight, which is exactly what happens in that. However, at the end of that, Lucy lives. In this one, and I don't usually like to talk about the ending right away, but I do think it is important, Lucy does die in this version, as does Dracula, and Jonathan turns into a vampire, and Van Helsing is arrested. So, wow, got real harsh real fast, and kind of turned into a huge downer out of nowhere. So that is different from both source materials, if you will. In terms of some other differences, we've mostly covered that in our original Nosferatu episode, but this is a much longer version. I think this clocks in at about an hour 45, where the original Nosferatu is like 75 minutes or so.
Yeah.
But a lot of that is less because we have shoved plot details in, and more because Werner Herzog loves a deliberate pace. Yeah, before we kind of get into anything about what we thought of either the plot changes, the performances, the direction, any of that, could you give us a little bit of background on the actual production of this film?
Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, Werner Herzog considers Nosferatu, the original 20s version, to be the greatest German film, with Murnau as the greatest German director, and he wanted to make this as his homage or his attempt to recapture what he loved about that original. This movie was filmed with a pretty tiny budget, with a crew of only 16 people. There are a couple differences in some of the filming locations. He had originally hoped to film the movie in Wismar, which is where the original town is set, and have that same architecture, but he was unable to do so. So he filmed a lot of it in Delft in the Netherlands, with Czechoslovakia and I think Pernstein castle filling in for Dracula's castle. I struggled with the pronunciation of this. Fun fact, I did look up the anglicized version, and it is roughly Berenstain Castle.
Oh, that's good. Or is it Berenstain Castle, Will? Whoa.
Ooh, I don't know. I guess it depends on which reality we're in.
Oh, God.
The makeup for Klaus Kinski took 4 hours to apply every single day. Kinski, who is famously, again, insane, was kept in line in this movie, partially because he was very committed to this role, and partially because Herzog would lord this makeup time over him and keep him in line by threatening to keep him in the makeup chair for longer if he started to act up.
Okay, that's kind of funny.
Yep, yeah, the whole interaction, the whole friendship slash faux ship between
faux ship, that's good.
Herzog and Klaus Kinski is truly infamous. They, I think, at one point both hired hitmen for each other.
Oh my God.
They also consider themselves each other's best friends, so, you know, just typical friendship stuff.
Yeah, really giving enemies to lovers revolving door.
So, there are some other parts of the production that are a little more of a downer. There's a whole section on the Wikipedia page that is just called animal abuse.
Oh, fuck.
And so, I don't really want to get into it in great detail. We'll provide the link in our notes if you are interested in reading up on what went down with this. But the big thing is, unsurprisingly, the city of Delft was not really up for the idea of Werner Herzog releasing what I think the article put as 11,000 rats
Jesus
onto
Christ.
the streets for this movie. 11,000 rats. 11,000 lab rats. And so they filmed it in a nearby town. And I won't go into a lot of details, but unfortunately the rats were really, really mistreated on this.
Lame.
It's not stuff I really want to get into. This is unfortunately a thing that seems to come up in a lot of Herzog's filmography from this time period.
Yeah, I blame it being both like the 70s, where everybody like seemed to give very few shits about a lot of things, and also that Herzog is so like pragmatically German. He kind of almost has that like Amish mindset about animals, which is that they are like tools and ways to like improve your life, make money, or feed you, as opposed to like things that are alive. Whoops, that sucks.
Yeah, so I feel really bad for these 11,000 rats that are in these movies, and we should honor them.
Shout out to those rats. Also, 11,000 Rats is a really good 10,000 Maniacs cover band. Not that anybody wants to be in a 10,000 Maniacs cover band, I'll be real. But I'm
maybe the one person is in our listening audience right now.
I would love that.
And we have just given them an incredible gift.
Oh, God, I hope so. But yes, that's fucking good, dude. And I actually think that really kind of cuts to the core. That's a great quote. Oh my God. Wait, that's so good. Okay, first of all, what a great review in both of those quotes. But I think that that's very apt, especially the second part, because as we have discovered, the 70s were fucking rife with Dracula content specifically. And I think that you do see a lot of performances that start to look the same, even though everybody for some reason is under the impression that they're different. This year, They Want Your Blood is so fucking funny just as an image. I feel like if anybody out there can draw, if somebody could do a Dracula as Santa Claus with a kid, that would be amazing.
We already have us Dracula as Santa Claus art.
We actually do.
From last year.
Shout outs to
Aaron. We just need a kid now.
Yeah, shout outs to Aaron. I'll put, I think I put that in at least one album on Instagram, but I'll link him below. Fun fact, he is now moving to the United States to be with his partner.
Yay!
Thanks, Aaron. Congrats to you and Julia. Julia also just went to go see Ghost last night, and I'm like so jealous, but I
am seeing them on this coming Friday.
I am hopefully going to see them on Wednesday. If I got a ticket hookup, but I'm really excited about that. That hyped me up for spooky season as well. Anyway, those reviews were great. And I think that particularly the first part is what we should spend a good chunk of time talking about, which is that this film is very meditative. Again, cleanse yourself of the expectation that things will happen. This is a film that can be at times like almost agonizingly slow, but it's so lush visually that after watching it, I like kind of forgot that I was bored for the first 20 minutes. Once we get to Transylvania in particular, because as you said, all of this was filmed on location, this shit looks incredible. Herzog has an amazing way of capturing the natural world. You see this in Grizzly Man. He just has these huge, far out, like on location shots of the Carpathian Mountains, of these long winding trails through fields of wildflowers. And it is actually stunning. Like it has a Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings quality to it, where you're like, is that actually like real? But that sort of very deliberate and slow pace is what makes this a pretty unique adaptation, because plot-wise, you can talk about what happens in 10 minutes, but a lot of this is spent kind of contemplating the characters, silently contemplating the landscape, contemplating the sets, which again are like actually gorgeously stunning. The castle is something that my wife and I, she watched this with me, pointed out in particular. The location they used for that is such a fun switch from usual, where you have these kind of dark, gothic, dusty corners, whereas this one, all of the stonework is white, like bright white. So you can see how like dirty and worn down everything is. It has almost like a Greek feel to it. Like it looks like a ruin.
I think this is such an interesting counterpoint to the last 70s Dracula movie we did with Frank Langella, where the castle in that is so massive. It is a lot of matte paintings. It is supposed to be cavernous, almost impossibly large. And this one is such a small, narrow, and claustrophobic castle. When Jonathan first enters, you feel like he is truly stuck somewhere. You've just been in these wide open vistas, these mountains, and you get these long shots of him just walking into the vanishing point in the distance. And then suddenly he's in this narrow confine of a castle, and it feels so immediately stifling. It's so good.
It's so good. And like that stifling aspect of it visually pairs really well with the way that the first scene, which I think is one of the most impressive scenes in the film, where it's the first meeting between Dracula and Jonathan, and you've got the famous dinner scene where Jonathan cuts himself cutting a piece of bread. There is no scoring in this section of the film. Kinski, and we'll get into his performance later because, like, holy fuck, moves with such a, like, combination of squirrely and, like, nervous, but also extremely predatory, in a very solid way, if that makes sense. Like, he's kind of twitchy, but he's also, looks like he's an animal, like, stalking his prey like a lion. And that, in these tight little sets, with no music and almost no dialogue, is a fucking oppressive atmosphere. It is completely mesmerizing to watch. There are whole sections of this where there are no cuts and almost no camera movement at all. And boy, that actually genuinely did kind of scare me. Like, this is, I would consider this like art house horror, but not in a like A24 kind of way, more where it's like a fairly tame, nearly bloodless film, but has such a overbearingly tense atmosphere. It will put you on edge, like, for sure.
The scene where Jonathan cuts his finger and Dracula starts sucking on his hand is so, made me physically feel ill. It is so gross and so icky to look at.
Yeah, dude. And then he, like Jonathan stands up, and then Dracula starts quietly walking him across the room into a corner, but, like, extremely slowly. And we see this kind of movement from Kinski and from the camera, which I think works really well together. Like, they clearly, again, Herzog and Kinski have some sort of, like, fucked up psychic connection, because they capture each other very well, like, circularly. But he starts walking Jonathan across the room and backs him into a corner without a fucking word and almost without blinking, in a way that is, like, genuinely unnerving to watch. And that kind of atmosphere, I feel like, is when the film is at its best. We get that pretty much anytime Kinski is on screen, but he's not on screen all the time. And I think there are parts of this that do drag. I think the first 20 minutes before we get to the castle was, like, pretty slow. And, like, once we started getting these beautiful nature shots is when I was engaged. But, like, when we're just in, like, Weimar, Germany, Weimar, not sure, that, to quote my wife, looks like PBS. And then we get out of there, and the film really comes alive, both in terms of its, like, stunning visual beauty and its, like, fucking arresting performance, from Kinski. As it goes on, I still think it did retain some of that horror, but that scene is a standout for me, because that actually felt like we were up against something scary instead of, like, a squirrely little bald guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's also one real jump scare in that scene that really doesn't feel like a traditional jump scare. It is that it just smash cuts at one point to a little boy playing a violin outside of Dracula's castle for some reason.
Oh, okay, you're totally
And
right,
it
though.
made me actually like pop up in my seat.
Because it's really loud. Because of that scene prior to it has no scoring. And then suddenly there's this like little kid playing violin, and yeah, you are correct. That is 100% the jump scare uh, of the violin child. Oh, that's so fucking funny. Oh man. But yeah, in terms of like the way that this film is directed, it is slow. If you are not used to watching movies that are slow, like if you couldn't do Skinamarink, don't do this. But I do think it's worth watching just because it is, as I said, like a term that keeps coming to mind for me is slow motion horror. And I think that atmosphere throughout makes for kind of a unique viewing experience. It seems like you had some notes about the score, about Popovol's, that score that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I really love that the way the score comes in and out, and particularly the way that it plays throughout Jonathan's travels through the Carpathians. It is a sort of, I think, maybe a klezmer, some kind of, it is very Eastern European string instrument kind of
very,
sounds.
very specifically so, yeah.
And the way that it just sort of rotates and tumbles and moves along with the scenery, the sort of jagged mountains, almost puts you in this hypnotic state.
Totally.
And it's really just, I mean, if you can really just lower yourself and get into the vibe of this movie, it will really open itself up to you. And that's the stuff that always sticks out to me when I was rethinking about this movie. The thing more than anything else were just these long shots in the score and Jonathan crossing these purple mountains into the distance and walking along these treacherous trails through mountain passes. Because I think that's some of the most arresting stuff you're seeing in the movie. I think a lot of other adaptations want to make that journey much more perfunctory. They want to get you to the castle for obvious reasons, and having a scene where you truly have to experience the journey and experience how foreboding actually getting to Dracula's castle on the edge of the earth basically is really, really interesting. I think another thing I noted is that they completely cut out the train travel in this, and for the first leg of the journey, you have Harker just riding a horse and then walking, and it really feels like it is taking Dracula outside of the mechanized world and the modern world that the book and a lot of adaptations really inhabit, and really putting almost the whole thing squarely into the natural world, which feels pretty par for the course for a lot of Herzog's interests.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense, and I think that's a great observation. I particularly like the scoring in those sections as well. I will say there were a couple scenes where it did stand out to me and not in a good way. Like there's one scene where the Demeter arrives in town, which first of all is a great segment. This one has the kind of iconic shot of this boat just drifting into a little quiet canal early in the morning, and the captain has tied himself to the wheel, and there are no survivors, but there are, as mentioned, 11,000 rats. But as Dracula is emerging from his coffin on the Demeter, there was some kind of like lush string scoring that just felt a little out of place to me. And I noticed that in the latter half of the movie, it went like pretty hard on the more traditional classical music scoring, where I kind of wish we'd stayed with that odd kind of almost ambient stuff that we had seen earlier. But I do think that your points are very salient about how it really kind of gets you in the zone. I was speaking with my wife and a couple friends of ours about a anime called Serial Experiments Lane, which is from the 90s and a really weird piece of artwork. And then I spoke with another friend, Wendy, who we've talked about on the podcast before, and her description, I think, of it was very apt, which was you don't really watch Lane, you just kind of let it happen to you, and that it's very meditative. And I have the same exact response to this movie that I do to when I watch Lane.
You gotta drop the title of that for me somewhere. Like, text
Yes.
that to me, because that
Yes.
sounds exactly my jam.
I think you will like it a lot. And then you'll watch it and you'll be like, this was made for Addie. Last kind of notes about direction before we get on to performances. There's a couple of other moments in this in terms of just like images that I think are extremely beautiful, just like cinematography wise. There's a whole section where, much like in the original Nosferatu film, everybody is attributing all of the deaths in town to the plague. So as a result, Lucy is kind of frantically searching around town to try to tell people, like, no, it's not the plague. Like, there is a monster and there's something I can do about it. But there's this big sweeping overhead shot of her walking into the town square, and there are coffins and fires everywhere and people like crying and mourning. And then in the center of the town square, there is essentially a party because everybody's like, oh, we all have the plague. Like, we're going to die. Like, join us for this dance. And she's swept up into this dance. And that kind of overhead shots showing the scale of the destruction in the town contrasted with this merriment, I thought was really beautiful. And then at the end of that scene, there's kind of a twisted little take on the Last Supper where we have people eating at a table, like one side of a table. And then there is a very sharp jump cut to the table immediately empty, but covered in rats. And that was such a great moment for me that I actually like gasped out loud, because that's a good use of, for such long shots, having a few really sharp jump cuts in this film makes it pop a lot.
Oh yeah, that whole like Danza Macabre scene is incredible.
Yeah, dude, holy fuck.
Some of the most unsettling imagery in the movie. Now, I'm gonna make my incredibly nerdy reference because I was watching this again. I'm like, wow, FromSoft just lifted so much for their whole like Dark Souls, Bloodborne aesthetic.
Oh, absolutely. The like decaying medieval energy, or later on decaying Victorian. You are very correct about that. It's also getting to be the time of year where I'm like really itching to get into Bloodborne again. Anyway, that's kind of what I've got for the cinematography and all that. Actually, I lied. Two more quick things. We do have a couple of direct shot-for-shot recreations from the 1920s version. One of them being my favorite shot in the first one, which is Lucy sitting on a graveyard on the beach. That is a direct shot recreation. And then also some of them of Kinski in the archways of his castle, much like the famous shots of Max Schreck. But anyway, shall we get into some of the performances here?
Yes, absolutely. Where do you want to start?
You know what? Let's save Kinski for last. Let's do, honestly, I think the only people that we really need to hit on are our main three. Actually, let's do four. We'll do Jonathan, Lucy, Renfield, Kinski. That work for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So who plays Jonathan again?
Bruno Gans.
Okay.
Gans.
Some people may recognize him. I think he very famously or infamously has played Hitler in the film Downfall, which is from the early 2000s. Yeah, so you might remember him from that. He's also in a couple of other films. He's in The Manchurian Candidate. He is in Wings of Desire, but he does a great job in this. I thought we've had a lot of wet noodle Jonathans in the past. He does a really good job of, in the first half, still having a personality while being kind of like your upstanding citizen, slowly losing his shit in the castle. There's a couple scenes of him like really frantically and desperately trying to break out because he's been locked in. His total determination in getting home back to Lucy as he is falling ill with vampirism, and he's like sweating and like passed out on a horse, and these Romani people are like, you need to see a doctor, and he's like, no. And then in the second half of the film, as he's starting to change, you see a much more sinister side. And it's a very nuanced performance. What did you think of his work?
I really liked it a lot. I think he really goes from this passivity as he's in the city going into the mountains to this desperation to being basically a husk of himself by the time he is back home in Wismar is really fantastic. He really goes through a whole arc in his performance, especially as he starts to kind of lose more of himself and succumb more to vampirism towards the end.
Yeah, it was it kind of again led to the whole like fucking grim atmosphere of this movie, dude. But yeah, great work from him. Next up, we have Isabella Johnny as Lucy. Man, I think both of us were very obviously into her performance for a variety of reasons.
Yes.
You go first.
For totally normal reasons.
Totally normal stuff here.
Yes. Aside from me just really liking tall, spooky brunettes.
Mm-hmm.
She's just so cool and good in this movie. She is incredibly visually striking.
Yes.
She's made up with very dark circles around her eyes, like really great eye makeup, and really feels physically like a foil to Count Dracula in this movie in a lot of ways. They are of similar complexion. They both stand out in the frame in very similar ways as well.
Oh, yeah, good
But
point.
I think what I really like about her is that she is trying to take charge in a world that is completely falling apart around her and will not listen to her, and she takes it entirely upon herself to bring this to an end. We've seen, again, a lot of Mina Lucy characters that have really wildly varied in their sense of agency and what they're allowed to do on screen, and she is just incredible. This is, I think, really as much her movie as it is actually Dracula's. She, once Harker is off in Transylvania, it really becomes her story, and she is the focal point, and she does a tremendous job.
I am completely in agreement. I think this is the best like main female protagonist we've seen so far. I think that it's fun that Herzog also cast a very like visually striking taller woman, because in the 20s Nosferatu, it's kind of the same thing where she's this very strong visual presence. A note here from my wife as we were watching is that she looks like Shelley Duvall going through a goth phase.
I love that note because also I would like to see it.
I would also like to see it. I love Shelley Duvall. But yeah, you really hit the nail on the head. It's her movie, other than like, Klaus Kinski's movie, but they share the spotlight really well. She's determined, as you said. This is one of the first times we've actually seen the Mina/Lucy character be able to like do shit. And I personally really liked the way she spoke. So this film was actually shot in a couple of different languages. It was filmed in German and English, at least. Will and I both watched the English version, but most of these actors are German. So she speaks with a very heavy...
She is, I think, French.
Oh, she's French. My bad. So she speaks with a very heavy accent, but she has a very low, like almost contralto voice. And she speaks very monotone, and it kind of lends itself really well to the nature of this film, which is already very low key. And her role as this real, kind of force to be reckoned with. And yeah, she did a great job. I loved watching her. She was really mesmerizing when she was on screen. On the other side of the spectrum, we've got Renfield, who, in this, is played by Roland Topol. I think this is probably the worst Renfield we've seen so far. I don't know if that's a controversial opinion or not, but I did not fucking care for this shit at all.
It is a guy doing a funky little giggle throughout the whole thing, and that is specifically why Herzog cast him in this movie, at least apocryphally so. So Roland Topol, I did not know this, is one of the collaborators with Alejandro Jodorowsky.
Oh.
Who were making experimental movies in the 60s and 70s. And my understanding is that Herzog saw an interview with him on TV and heard him do that weird little giggle and is like, yes, I love this. I need this guy to be my Renfield.
Oh my God. Werner, I swear to fucking God, it does not work for me. I'm sure that, I get that it was an intentional choice. I just don't fucking like it. I think it's annoying. I think it's one note, and I think it's like so over the top because everybody else's performances are so strong. It makes it seem even weaker. Ugh. Am I just being over the top with that? Did you also not like it? Is it weird?
It's very weird. I don't think I had the same depth of emotion about it,
All
but
right, valid.
it is. But here's the thing I feel is that he's one of the Renfields that starts off the movie just completely off the rocker. The man is unchained completely. When he is talking to Jonathan and giving him his instructions on going to Transylvania, which he tells him he has to do immediately.
Yeah.
He has some whole spiel about his yes, it'll be an important job. It will require some sweat and perhaps some blood. And I'd be like, at that point, I feel like I'd be like, I'm gonna find a different job.
Yeah, I'd be like, what? I'm Gucci. Thanks, though.
Yeah, nothing on earth could convince me to take that job after this guy said that.
No, you are completely correct. Okay, yeah, so I was just being, I think it just, gets under my skin in a way that, is not actually effective. It's more annoying. But yeah, I also wouldn't do that. Good God. But saving the best for last, we have the one, the only Klaus Kinski as Count Dracula, who, again, is visually made up to most closely resemble Max Schreck in the original Nosferatu. This performance is fucking hypnotically good. Holy cow, his physicality down to every muscle, his hands, his eyes, is so arresting to watch. Again, the scene with him and Jonathan, while Jonathan is eating dinner, Kinski is just staring at him unblinkingly for an unbroken shot of maybe 20 or 30 seconds. And that, when you see it in a film for that long, being so still, is really fucking weird and unsettling. But I fucking loved watching him in this. He brought it. And you can tell he was so dedicated to it, as you said. But I really enjoyed this, especially because Kinski is such a crazy motherfucker. But he is really good at playing these bizarre, almost, obviously inhuman, but the performance itself is almost how did somebody fucking do that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I do. I think what I find really interesting about this performance is that I think he plays Dracula as a truly pitiful creature in the way that no other actor has. There's obviously sexuality and sensuality is really important to this adaptation, especially once Lucy and Dracula come face to face, but this is Dracula's a truly pitiful creature.
Yeah.
He feels almost like he inhabits the screen like a scrawny, mangy animal when he's in the castle.
Yeah.
He just feels like this undernourished, deeply sad, almost sickly thing. And it is truly, it's hypnotic to watch. It feels like somebody who... It feels like this is what happens when you're so truly isolated from everyone and everything. This is a creature that has just been existing in these ruins of a castle for years on end without any human interaction, and it plays on his face.
Yeah, and as we said, this film is more about the visuals than it is about the plot in a lot of ways, and an extension of that is thematically, there's what's in the original and what's in the book, but it's pretty downplayed. However, I will say I really enjoyed that this, as you said, he's pitiful and almost weary, world weary. And I think that some of his monologues really bring to light, I think the central theme of his character is that like no, immortality fucking sucks. And like he talks specifically about like it is a curse to never be able to die, and to like kind of as a result never be able to love anyone. There's a quote from Kinski that I think kind of is very, very apparent when you watch this film. We will see Dracula sympathetically in this film. He is a man without free will. He cannot choose and he cannot cease to be. He is a kind incarnation of evil, but he is also a man who is suffering for love. This makes it so much more dramatic, more double-edged. And like you see that every time he speaks, every time he moves, everything is so deliberate and it comes through very clearly.
I think the scene where Dracula and Lucy come face to face is really fascinating, because she's at her boudoir, she's I think at a vanity, and obviously because vampires don't reflect, he just walks into the room and appears behind her.
So fucking good.
And they just have this very chilling conversation where she's not showing any fright, she's just sort of staring him down directly, and there's almost a spark between them. They both feel like they are on this same wavelength, both fixated on death and dying. And in many ways, as my friend Heather pointed out, like they're made for each other in some weird way.
Yeah, and like I also love how you get kind of a twist on the romance where she is just like, she kind of kicks him out. Like she's like, get the fuck out of here. Like she really stands her own in that scene in a way that I think some other adaptations that have the romance between either Mina and Dracula or Lucy and Dracula, some of them immediately just go like 0 to 60 romance. Whereas this kind of like, she very clearly stands her ground, and is not afraid of him, but also isn't gonna like swoon. It was a really chilling exchange there. And later on, when we get Lucy sacrificing herself, which does result in her death in this version, we've seen this a couple of times where we have kind of like a reverse seduction. And I'm curious to hear what you thought about that scene, that final scene between Lucy and Dracula, where they kind of kill each other.
I've been thinking a lot about it since I watched the movie a couple of days ago, and interpreting it differently as I've considered it more. Because I feel like at the end, starts purely as a sacrifice, and then it feels like maybe something has unlocked in her, and she is inviting him in, and when she dies very peacefully. Whereas he dies in tremendous agony, just convulsing on the floor.
Yeah, no, that's real. I think my only, like, I actually think it would have been a little better almost if, like, there's a very clear moment right before he bites her where he does, like, lift up her skirt. And, like, I kind of wish that they hadn't done that because, like, again, there is obviously, like, a sensual and sexual undercurrent to all of this in any adaptation. But I kind of think it would have been more interesting if it was more about, as Dracula's talked about, like, I literally can't love. There it seemed more like a predatory thing, and I think it kind of took away from, like, the enormity of the moment for both of them. But I think your points about, like, the contrast and how they die is really interesting. I'd love that they... First of all, Kinski's makeup in every scene looks fucking awesome. It holds up really good. He looks insane. It's great. I'd love that when he is initially struck by sunlight, they put white contacts in. That looks fucking dope as hell. And it holds up really, really, really great. Especially after all this time. And then leaving this scene of destruction, going downstairs and having the reveal that Jonathan is now a vampire is like such a 1-2 punch of a downer. but I didn't hate it. I thought it was an interesting interpretation. It very very 2010s grimdark of them to do like a cliffhanger where Jonathan is now the vampire and gets on his horse and leaves again. Very like circular cycle of life and death kind of stuff. But great performance. Just overall a film that can be kind of long and difficult, but like if it's your thing, is definitely worth watching. Do you have any other kind of like random bits and bobs that you want to talk about before we give this our rankings and such?
No, but I will add a little more that I think, to your point about it being something that if it's really your thing, give it a shot. And I'd say even if it's not, if this feels like something that's maybe far afield from what you normally like with horror, maybe put it on the background. I think this is a movie where it is still enough, and if you just have it on and just sort of let it wash over you, and you really get to experience it, I think you'll get a lot out of this one. This is unlike a lot of the other movies we have seen so far in this podcast journey, and I feel like we're not going to see a lot like it. And I mean, we're especially if the next one we're going to do is Voyage of the Demeter. That's, from what I understand, like a real fun B-movie blood fest.
Yeah.
And so I think, if that's normally a thing, give this a shot as a contrast. I think it's a great introduction into Herzog's filmography.
I am completely in agreement. Okay, so where do we put Klaus Kinski in the great, enormous ranking of Draculas, which I'm going to be honest with you, I have kind of forgotten where we've had everybody. But I will say, I think I'm going to put him squarely at number 3 or 4. This was fucking incredible to watch. What do you think?
Yeah, he's up there for me. I might even put him up at 2 because this performance is just so masterful.
I think that's valid. I got to go back and find our master list here, but this is one of the best that we've seen so far. And I would put him more squarely in like the creepy camp as opposed to the suave, sexy camp. And also like not as aggressively monstrous as I think we're going to see in Demeter, as I've seen some of the shots from that. But decidedly creepy. Yeah, I'd say so.
I mean, it's played for a different kind of thing because it's creepy, but it's like in a very understated kind of animalistic way. It's not a monster. It's a truly pitiful kind of creature existing at the fringes of things.
Definitely. And then before we sign off here, we obviously have to pick each other's notes. Do you want to go first?
I'm going to actually point out one thing that I love. I hope I'm not stealing yours.
No, do it. Do it.
It is that both of us, independently of each other, have in all caps the note Goose!
Yep, that's it. That's what we should pick as each other's because we have the same brain. There's a shot where Jonathan is in an inn with the Romani people, and he says Dracula, and there's like an almost comic cut where everybody stops what they're doing and stares, and then a goose pops up from inside of a basket, and it's the funniest shit I've ever seen. But I'm very happy that we both picked Goose. That is it. That's our notes. That's it. Goose in all caps. Yep, beautiful. Well, next time we will be joined by our good friend Sarah to review The Last Voyage of the Demeter. And before we sign off here, Will, do you want to do the reading of the tweet?
I do. This one comes from @TomBuddyToLove. Dracula with a guitar. Anyways, here's wonderful.
God, that's so fucking stupid. I love it. Well, that's all we've got for you today, folks. Thank you for joining us, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.